Hello everyone, Silent here and welcome back to another episode of Bugrock of the Week. Today we're going to be checking out the newest 1.16 betas for the Caves and Cliffs update. A lot of great new features have been added in these betas. The Bedrock Edition worlds can now generate all the way down to Y-64 in preparation for the new cave generation that we should be getting sometime soon. And then of course we have all of the Lush cave blocks that have been added. All of these are very cool looking and we're going to be checking all of them out in detail, of course, and naturally there are a ton of bug fixes and updates to existing features in these betas, so we have a lot of things to check out. Stay tuned. In today's video, we're going to be checking out beta 1.16.225.1. That's basically just a small little beta of like 3 or 4 changes that we're going to mention, not really a bunch of interesting things in that beta. However, the main beta for today's video is 1.16.225.2. This introduces the deeper cave generation, the Lush blocks, and a bunch of interesting bug fixes as well. And one last thing before we hop into the title content, I would like to mention that KitKat devices, which are basically old Android phones from about 2013 era, those are now being discontinued by Mojang and will no longer get any more Bedrock Edition updates. Mojang does this for older devices or underpowered devices that can no longer handle modern versions of Bedrock Edition, and also to prevent those devices from getting an unplayable version of Bedrock as well. If you're interested in more information on device discontinuation, I created another video all about that because this is not the first time Mojang has discontinued devices. Anyway, on to the fancy caves. And now for the moment that we've all been waiting for. We get to check out the new lower generation of the worlds. So right now we're standing at Y64, which is kind of like the default generation height of most terrain, like plains or, watery areas. And the worlds now generate going all the way down to Y-64. So this little command block setup right here is going to dig us a hole going down 128 blocks. And wow, as you can see, that is a deep hole. That's a lot of world. That's kind of a ridiculous amount of world, isn't it? Crazy. So, of course, the generation is not completely done yet. They've simply lowered how far down the world can generate. They have not added in any of the ore generation. This is a giant mess over here, isn't it? They have not added in any of the granites or gravels or diorites or andesites or any of that nonsense below Y0. So that's why everything from here down is basically stone. You can see that there are a couple of the standard old style vanilla caves. You can see that there is a little bit of the lava lakes and a couple other basic features, but really nothing has been done with that kind of generation. They are going to be working on that in future betas, but the difficult task is now done. The worlds now generate all the way down to Y-64, and this is really, really exciting because now we're going to start getting all of the fancy features that we really, really want to see. Something that's maybe worth mentioning is that some of the terrain generation features, such as ores and gravel and various other blocks, those can actually go all the way down to around Y-4. This right here is Y0, so you can see that we have a couple things below that, which is of course a little bit interesting. Naturally, all of these terrain generation features will be added to the lower levels in a future beta, so don't worry about that. And furthermore, we have a couple of slime chunks over here, and I would like to test if things can actually spawn in the negative coordinates. I have a feeling that they don't. Yep, I've pretty well confirmed it. Nothing spawns at Y coordinate 0 or below. This right here is at Y coordinate 1, and this right here is at 0. I've seen 0 things spawn over there, but of course we're getting a bunch of mobs and slimes and things over here as well. So basically nothing is going to spawn currently at 0 or below, which actually makes perfect sense. The spawning algorithm probably just is not made to go that far down into the world. Of course, this will very, very likely be fixed in a future beta, so don't worry about that at all. Just because mobs don't spawn at 0 or below does not mean that you are safe from the wandering trader. He will find you, no matter where you are. You could be down at the very bottom or the very top of the world. You could be in the far lands. He will try to sell you ferns. So we all have a few questions regarding how the old worlds are going to be handled with the new world terrain generation, and the Bedrock solution is actually pretty fitting to the name, basically just like fill it with bedrock. So on the right, you can see some old chunks from before this update, and on the left, you can see some new chunks with the newer lower terrain generation. And as you can see, the old chunks just have bedrock absolutely filled below Y0. This is like the actual solution to the problem, and it's not really that great. I don't know if this is a permanent solution, but it's definitely a very bad solution. We're going to conduct a little bit of an experiment real quick and see exactly how the new terrain generation works. So we are on a pre-116 beta world, and this of course has the generation go all the way down to Y0, of course. So as you can see, the bedrock stops right here at Y0, and I've of course cleared this all the way out to the void. Now the question of this experiment is, how exactly does the world generation work with the bedrock filling? So we're going to go ahead and turn this on to experimental mode for caves and cliffs and see what happens. I'm guessing the entire bottom of this is going to get filled with bedrock all the way to -64, and yeah, basically, it's just a bunch of bedrock. This goes down 64 blocks all the way to -64, and the bedrock starts at Y-1. So that is kind of the fate of our worlds with this bedrock filling system. We really need a better solution. An anything different solution. This is like the worst solution to the problem. Just fill it with lava or diorite or cake, or just make it void. You know, whatever happens. Maybe put the new cave generation down there. Literally anything is better than filling it with bedrock. There's actually several more reasons why this is an absolutely terrible system, especially for the bedrock edition. However, there's just a little bit too much to delve into for this video, so stay tuned for another video about why this is bad very, very soon. In other news, this is the new size of a standard chunk in Minecraft. Yeah, that's a lot of blocks. If you want to mine out a chunk nowadays, you now have to remove basically twice as many blocks. There's two small bug fixes in the 1.16.225.1 beta worth mentioning. First of all, the trident drowns will now hold their tridents correctly when throwing them again, so that's good. You might notice this in the full release. Whenever they hold their trident like this, it's actually backwards, so the pointy end would be behind them, and as you can see, that is now fixed in this beta. They've also made some adjustments to the input lag and input latency on Windows 10 devices. This had to do with when you had VSync turned on in your video settings, you would have more input lag and delay, and supposedly that has been fixed in this beta. Here's hoping. So that's it for the world generation changes. However, they've also added 11 new planty items for the Lush cave biomes that'll be coming in the future betas. So we have the moss carpets. These are basically just retexture carpets. We have moss blocks, a very interesting block we'll talk about later. The big and small drip leaves. I'm not sure how you actually get the small drip leaves. I had to set block that one. And then we have the azalea, the flowering azalea, the cave vines, the spore blossom, and the beautiful particles that come with it, the hanging roots, and then we also have the rooted dirt, as you can see here, and the glow berries that you get from bone mealing the cave vines. So if you like lush things, greenery, ruined builds, or lush caves, this is the beta for you. We're going to go over all of this in detail real quickly and check out everything there is to know, starting with the simplest items. The small drip leaf, I don't even think you can place down in this beta. I haven't found any way to actually get it into the world as of now, but you can get it into the world using a set block command, and that is basically what it looks like. We also have the big drip leaf that you can see here. This is basically like a lily pad that has grown out of the water. You can bone meal this thing to make it taller. No, it does not delete bedrock. I checked, and when you stand on this thing, like the leaf actually falls and then you fall down through it. So it's going to be very interesting to use for parkour maps and other interesting things like that. I guess you can kind of cheat the system by bone mealing it, and that'll stop it from failing. Yeah, I guess that works. Okay, well that is the drip leaves. Pretty cool stuff. We also have the azalea. This is going to make for some cool tables, and I don't think there is any way to make this flower or anything, but then there is the flowering azalea, and I don't think there's any way to actually get the flowers off of that either, but these are two things that you can get from bone mealing the moss blocks. You can acquire all 4 of these things just by punching them, and they all just pop off as items. No tools, silk touch, or shears required. And next up we have the rooted dirt. This is basically a different kind of dirt that isn't really like a regular dirt. So if you till this stuff, it'll drop one of these hanging roots, which is kind of interesting, and that'll turn it into regular dirt. And then of course you can do whatever you want with that, turn it into a path block, or turn it into farmland, or do whatever you want. So if you bone meal this stuff on any side, it will create a hanging root underneath it, and then you can of course harvest these hanging roots with some shears. You don't get these things with silk touch, and you also don't get them by punching them either. So kind of treat it like a upside down piece of grass, because that's basically exactly what it is. It's almost exactly the same texture as well. And then we have the spore blossom. This thing is absolutely beautiful looking. I mean, just look at that. It is beautiful. It's got these cool little green particles that drip down from it all the time. If you punch this thing, you're going to actually get it. Interesting. And then if you go ahead and you harvest this thing with some silk touch, you're actually going to get it as well. But if you harvest it with shears, then you're going to get a hanging root, which I believe would be a bug, because if you can harvest it by hand, then you get it, but if you harvest it with shears, you don't get it. So that's probably a bug. Yeah, that's what I think that is. So you can only place this thing on the underside of blocks. You can't place it on the sides or on the tops of blocks. Almost all of this stuff is purely in the creative inventory because none of it really generates in the world at the moment. Moving on to the cave vines. These are basically green versions of the twisting vines from the Nether, and they have berries. Yay! No, they're actually really beautiful. So right now I have the random tick speed turned up to 1,000, so we can actually see the growth of these things, and they are pretty straightforward, really. You need silk touch in order to get the actual cave vine item, as you can see there. You can't harvest it with shears or anything like that. It just pops off and doesn't actually give you an item. Once you have this cave vine item, you can't actually place that as far as I've seen, but you can place the glow berries in order to get a new vine or to extend a current vine that's in the world. So that's kind of cool. Now, you might have noticed it there, but sometimes the new sections will grow with glowberries on them. You can right-click to harvest that, or if you simply break the entirety of the vine, the glowberries will also pop up as an item. So really, these things are pretty straightforward, and of course, you can also climb these like regular vines as well. Like I said, they're basically just green versions of this. Oh yeah, by the way, glowberries, they glow. Yeah, they glow a lot. They're actually pretty bright. It's basically a torch. And finally, we have moss carpets and moss blocks. Now, the moss carpets is literally just another carpet type. It's like basically exactly the same thing. I mean, here's lime carpet, here's green carpet, and here's a moss carpet. It's basically exactly the same thing. It even has the same crafting recipe. You take 2 moss blocks and then bam, you get 3 moss carpets. And there's really not much else to say about it besides it's beautiful. I love it. Now, the moss block, this is definitely the most interesting out of the new additions of blocks. Let's go over here for a second and I can show you what I mean. So if we place down a moss block in the ground real quick, we can bone meal this. We can get both fern types from a bone meal. We can get both of the grass types. We can get both of the azalea types, and we can also get the moss carpet as well. So basically you would create a flower farm type of design and then basically just bone meal these things a whole lot. And it turns the entire area essentially into a giant lush zone. As you can see from this little cave right here, I used 9 pieces of moss block and 9 bone meal, and this entire thing is now super lush and super green and super mossy, and overall it's pretty amazing in general. Now, these moss blocks actually turn other blocks into moss as well. So this right here is a 10 by 10 platform of stone, and we have one moss block in the middle, and if we bone meal that, then not really much happens. It's also worth noting, if the moss block has something above it, then you can't bone meal it. So as you can see, nothing really happens if it's above the layer of the blocks, but as soon as we move this down a layer, then all of the magic happens. As you can see, one bone meal has turned a bunch of stone into full moss blocks, which is incredibly interesting. And these things have quite the range as well. So one bone meal can give you quite a large rectangle, and really it's pretty straightforward. As you can see, we just got a ton of moss and it replaced all of the stone in the area. I've seen it even replace the diorites and andesites and other things like that too. Now, the preferred tool method for the moss blocks is the hoe, but as you can see, you can kind of just like punch it and it doesn't really have like, you know, that much mining resistance, but you can of course instant mine it using a hoe as well. Bone mealing the moss actually has some pretty interesting mechanics, so it's not going to spread moss to anything underneath a block. As you can see here, if we bone meal that moss block, nothing underneath of this stone got turned into moss, but everything on the outside edges did. Now, I also have a little bit of an experiment here to see what exactly the moss will replace. So if we bone meal this, it appears that the basic stone types got replaced. That was a gravel block right there, and I forget what those other two ones were, but I guess we'll just keep on bone mealing this to see what exactly happens. Oh wow, it just basically annihilated that entire side. Okay, let's keep bone mealing this. Replace all the blocks, will ya? So I tested a bunch of different blocks on this platform to see what exactly the moss could convert into other mosses, and these are my results. So the moss can turn the coarse dirt, farmland, stone, red sand, sand, gravel, both types of andesite, diorite, and granite into moss blocks. So if you put any of this stuff next to a moss block and then bone meal the moss, it could turn into more moss. Basically, you can turn stone or dirt into a bunch more moss for a little bit of a moss farm. I've said moss so many times. Moss, 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 moss. Bob Moss. You know, I might have to make a part 2 to this video, like in general, because there's about 40 bug fixes and other things I want to mention, and we're already at like 20 minutes of footage, so I should probably go now. Definitely let me know what you think about the new terrain generation and the new Lush Cave features down in the comment section. These features are now brand new to the Bedrock edition, so let me know what you think about it. Have you tried them out in beta yourselves? If so, tell me your thoughts down below. Overall, I'm really enjoying them so far, and I think they have a lot of potential for some beautiful biomes. But that is going to do it for today's episode of Bugrock of the Week. If you have enjoyed, make sure to leave a like on the video. It really does help out the video and the channel a ton. If you are new here, then consider subscribing so you don't miss future episodes of Bugrock. And otherwise, I'll see you all down in the comment section, and in the next one, thank you so very much for watching. And then there was silence.